Henry Sylvester Williams, an activist and barrister from Trinidad, was nothing if not energetic. On his third adoptive country since leaving home, he arrived in the UK in the late 19th century, where he continued undeterred, a rabble-rousing organiser on a mission to ensure that Victoria's black subjects were conferred with the justice that British notions of fair play promised. The African Association was founded in 1897 at the urging of Alice Victoria Kinloch, a South African woman classed as coloured. Bishop Alexander Waters was the first president. Henry Sylvester Williams was the secretary. And the aim of the African Association was to, and I quote, encourage a feeling of unity and to facilitate friendly discourse among Africans in general, to promote and protect the interests of all subjects claiming African descent wholly or in part, in British colonies and other places, especially in Africa, by circulating accurate information on all subjects affecting their rights and privileges as subjects of the British Empire, by direct appeals to the imperial and local governments, end quote. The African Association was also keen to raise awareness among the British public about the truth, i.e. the horrors Africans and people of African descent in the British Empire suffered, so that the government would be moved to fix them. Not wanting to put their public off with all the serious talk, meetings and social events were held. The society was so successful in its self-set task that in 1898, only a year after its operations began, Liberal Party members encouraged the African Association to put forward MPs, members of Parliament, to forward their cause and advocate in Parliament for people in the colonies. Keir Hardie would become a long-time friend to the organisation. After 2 years of meeting people up and down the UK through a separate lecturing gig he had, it was decided a conference to bring together all the people concerned about the fate of people of African descent should be organised by the African Association. Henry Sylvester Williams, with his extensive list of contacts in all corners of the black world, was the principal organiser. He coined the term Pan-African, and delegates thereafter came to use it. And here you have the 5 stated objectives of the first Pan-African Conference. The first Pan-African Conference took place between Monday the 23rd and Wednesday the 25th of July 1900. The African-American sociologist W.B. Du Bois was among them, and an important contributor to the debates at the landmark event in Westminster Town Hall. And like John Archer and John Alton Dorr, Anna Julia Cooper, Henry Francis Downing, Benito Silva, many of the 40 or so delegates' achievements have earned them a Wikipedia page a century later, although they don't all have one. The Bishop of London, Dr. Mandell Crichton, held a tea party at Fulham Palace, his official residence for the delegates. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, one of Britain's most eminent composers and himself of African heritage, provided the musical offering and later joined the committee. According to Du Bois, however, and I quote, "The visit to the Houses of Parliament and tea on the terrace was the crowning honour of the series. Great credit is due to our genial secretary, Mr. H. Sylvester Williams, for these social functions." This was, however, not another grander African Association social. Delegates of the first Pan-African conferences gave talks, they shared experiences and put forward solutions. They addressed a number of issues, including discrimination, equal rights, self-government, perceived inferiority of black people, progress of the race, inadequate education, exploitation, to identify just a few. In fact, according to Wikipedia, speakers over the 3 days addressed a variety of aspects of racial discrimination. And here's a list of some of the papers delivered or talks given at the very first Pan-African Conference in 1900. In addition to these papers, topics discussed included Richard Phipps complaining of discrimination against black people in the Trinidadian civil service, and an attack by William Meyer, a medical student at Edinburgh University, on pseudo-scientific racism being used in the world of medicine. Discussions followed the presentations of the papers, and in South London speak, we would describe the delegates as not ramping, a strong way of saying that they pulled no punches when they analysed and described the world as they saw it in 1900. The conference endorsed and addressed the nations of the world. W.E.B. Du Bois was chairman of the committee tasked with composing this document, which, as European empires dominated the globe, was dispatched to the leaders of those countries with African subjects. The address is worth reading in itself and is a simple request for the right to a full humanity that could easily be made by any anti-racism organisation operating today. It was this text which first contained the line, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the colour line," which would later be reused by Du Bois in the foreword to his magnum opus, The Souls of Black Folk, in 1902. The address is clearly addressed to, no pun intended, to a white power structure, which it treats with reverence, which is perhaps more of a sign of the etiquette of Victorian England than impropriety. It is interesting that in the intervening years between 1900 and the 1945 Pan-African Conference, the hope for a change in the attitude from that power structure had substantially diminished, perhaps in the face of constant evidence that this was not going to happen. As well as the address, the first Pan-African Conference also outlined 7 items which were then sent to the reigning monarch, Queen Victoria, on the maltreatment of black and coloured people in South Africa for her immediate attention. They noted the degrading and illegal compound system of native labour in vogue in Kimberley and Rhodesia, and the so-called indenture, i.e. legalised bondage of native men, women and children to white colonists, the system of compulsory labour on public works, the pass or docket system used for people of colour, local bylaws tending to segregate and degrade the natives, such as the curfew, the denial to natives of the use of footpaths, and the use of separate conveying, difficulties in acquiring real property, difficulties in obtaining the franchise. The first Pan-African Conference specifically singled out South Africa as a problem some 48 years before the election of the government, which would pass the notorious apartheid legislation. The delegates may have foreseen the writing on the wall and perhaps had too recent a memory of institutionalized enslavement to not speak out about a situation which appeared so uncomfortably familiar. Alternatively, the African Association may also have simply been effective in circulating information and fostering friendships across the diaspora. A certain John Tengo Javabu, an iconic figure in his own right in South African history, would become one of Sylvester Williams' most trusted colleagues in years to come and join the executive committee of the Pan-African Association. Javabu founded and edited the first African language newspaper, Imvo Zaben Sundu, and was involved in establishing the University of Fort Hare, whose alumni reads like a who's who of African leaders: Mandela, Tambo, Pityana, Nyerere and Mugabe, to name a few. At the conference, the African Association was transformed into the Pan-African Association. Henry Sylvester Williams began a period of extensive travel after the conference. He travelled to Jamaica, home to Trinidad and the US in 1901, all to publicise the conference and to establish branches of the Pan-African Association. The Pan-African Association unfortunately did not flourish, and its journal, the Pan-African, was short-lived. The resolutions and address of the conference fell on deliberately deaf ears. The conference's success, however, lay in the articulation of its ambitions, in the networking it produced and the ideas it debated and enacted. At a time when the European and American intelligentsia was growing increasingly enamored with eugenics, when pseudo-scientific racism was making strides, this counter-discourse of the early Pan-Africanists in the first Pan-African Conference would reverberate and influence generations of black thinkers around the world for well over a century. W. Du Bois notably tried to revive the ideal of Pan-African assembling, and a series of conferences were held, or congresses as they were known then, were held between 1919 and 1929. However, none had the impact or prestige of that very first Pan-African Conference. He was, however, present at the 1945 meeting, and he presided over that iconic Pan-African Congress in Manchester, in England. The first conference was also covered in the mainstream British press. Many people were astonished to find out African-descended people could articulate their own problems and conceive of possible solutions simply by working together. Only 15 years after another conference in Berlin had believed itself empowered to carve up Africa with a ruler, an assembly of African people asserted, "Let the British nation, the first modern champion of Negro freedom, hasten to crown the work of Wilberforce and Clarkson and Buxton and Sharp to Bishop Colenso and Livingston, and give as soon as practicable the rights of responsible government to the black colonies of Africa and the West Indies. Let the nations of the world respect the integrity and independence of the first Negro states of Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti and the rest, and let the inhabitants of these states, the independent tribes of Africa, the Negroes of the West Indies and America, and the black subjects of all nations take courage, strive ceaselessly, and fight bravely, that they may prove to the world their incontestable right to be counted among the great brotherhood of mankind." And they added, "If, by reason of carelessness, prejudice, greed and injustice, the black world is to be exploited and ravished and degraded, the results must be deplorable, if not fatal, not simply to them but to the high ideals of justice, freedom and culture which 1,000 years of Christian civilization have held before Europe." On this, the 121st anniversary of the first Pan-African Conference, we lament that the prescient warnings of our forebears went so unheeded, but draw strength from their collective confidence that another, better world is possible.